All right, so I know it's section 10.2, we talked about it in class, and I just want to recap some of the things that are in our notes for those people who weren't here, as well as those people who want the video for reviewing. So remember in section 10.2, this is where we started seeing that our problems had a b value, and that b value tells us that that I had a trinomial, right? That was the word I looked for in class. That once we see a trinomial, we can't use our shortcuts because our graph is now shifting left and right. And that shifting left and right means, most importantly, that our axis of symmetry is what we have to do first. The axis of symmetry, remember or recall, has a formula. It's x equals the opposite of b over 2a. Once we have that axis of symmetry, once we have that value or that vertical line where x is equal to, so in this case we plugged in the opposite of b, we got x equal to -1. Our next step was then to plug in that x equals, that number, to find the y value of the vertex. So here's my work here in purple, and notice what we highlighted in class. The x coordinate of the vertex, we use x equals -b over 2a. We plug it into the original equation to find the y coordinate. So that's how we ended up with this first ordered pair. Remember that in our table, our ordered pair, the very first one, is in fact the vertex. All the rest of the points are our reflectable points or reflection points. And we can either count up or count down, whatever's useful to us, especially if we can find a spot where we can use that y-intercept. Because remember, the c value is our y-intercept. So that when our 0, -5. But since it's a reflection point, when I plot that, I can also plot it on the other side of the axis of symmetry, right? And then I plug in to find the rest of my reflection points. So you can see my work up here. Let me slide up so you can see all of that good stuff. So this is all the work for finding that table. I just didn't have enough space here in my little box. So that I plugged in +1 and +2, but I could just as easily have plugged in -2 and -3 to get those same output values. And then I would have reflected those to get the rest of the points on my graph. Remember that I said in class that when I'm grading these, I'm going to be looking that you got all the possible points on the graph. I'm going to be looking for that, and I'm going to be looking that you connected the dots with a curve and not a V. So make sure you either have a U or an umbrella, not a V shape. The second thing we talked about was that vertex value being a minimum or a low point. If my A had been negative, it would have been a high point. I'm going to go back down here and remind you of the things that we highlighted in class about C. And we didn't highlight anything in class about A, but we did a long conversation about all of its pieces. So that C is that y-intercept. Let's highlight some stuff here about A. And I'll use yellow. The A value will tell you whether your vertex will be a maximum, a highest point, or a minimum, lowest point. It tells you about whether the graph opens up or down. It also tells us about, we made this note about when A was positive. We made this note about when A was negative. We also talked about narrower and wider. Remember, a graph that's getting narrower is said to be stretched away from the x-axis, and a graph that is wider is said to be shrunk closer to the x-axis. We went ahead and we did an example problem. If you didn't do it or you weren't here, I really suggest that you pause the video, or you might be forced to pause the video at this point, and go ahead, give that problem a try, make sure you answer the questions, and then come back and check your work. So hopefully you graded that. You went through and now we're just checking our work. I want to point out a couple of things that we said in class. Remember that we said that this minimum value is always the y value of the vertex, and we can think of it as asking for the highest or the lowest output. Remember that in your table of points, you should start with your vertex, and you only need to list one of these ordered pairs. I will never mark it wrong if you list them both. So remember that you could have either of these reflection points when you graph that. When I go through and I grade your graphs on this quiz, I'm going to be looking that your points are in the proper spot and that you have used a curve and not a V. So make sure that you graph your points carefully and that you're doing your work carefully. If you have questions, we'll talk again in class tomorrow.